the time it took from when I signed to when it fell through, like all that time is time that you would be looking for another team, but you can't.
Hello, and welcome to the Kick It with Katie podcast. Hey team, it's Katie here, and today I have Sydney Cummings on the podcast, and she is one of the hosts of the Megged podcast. Their podcast came up in my feed in the last few days, and so I reached out to them to see if I could get them on the podcast. And so thank you guys for wanting to come on and share your stories. But I have binged almost all of their episodes in the last 3 days, and so it's a really fun podcast to learn about. The women's game is what they're specifically focused on, is women's professional soccer. But Sydney is on with us today, and she is going to share her story through soccer. So welcome, Sydney, and go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, Katie, thank you so much for having me, and the kind words about Megged. Obviously, Abby and I started that kind of just as a passion project, and it's really cool to connect with different podcasters like yourself, and kind of just grow soccer in general, specifically for us, the women's game. So thank you so much for having us. I like the serendipity of just popping up on your feed one day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got into soccer when I was 4 years old. I have 2 older brothers, so my parents threw them in everything. They're pretty close in age, so they got thrown in everything, and then I did as well. And so soccer was just kind of my thing. I just stuck with it. And when I got to the age where you kind of have to decide what sport you're going to pursue, because you can't do them all, soccer was just the one that I picked. It just was my favorite. I had a lot of friends who I played with in the town that I grew up in, which I didn't mention. I'm originally from New Jersey. So I grew up playing there. And yeah, then here I am 20 years later, still playing. So it definitely worked out for the best.
Awesome. Yeah, it's really cool to see where you've been able to go, especially as a female professional athlete. So when you were playing in New Jersey, what level did you start at, and what teams did you play for, or clubs specifically? Did you play high school on your way up there?
Yeah, so I grew up playing for my town team. I'm from a very small town in central Jersey, and I started playing, so it was like just travel soccer at that time. I started playing when I was in 3rd grade, so however old you are in 3rd grade. And then I played on that team all the way until 8th grade, so all through like my youth years. And now in hindsight, like you can't really do that. Like that really puts you at a disadvantage, like not being in like an academy or club or something like that. But I was really lucky that I was able to play with girls that I was friends with, I went to school with. I could ride my bike to practice if I really needed to. Like it was very close to where I grew up. And then when I was 14, I started playing for FC Copa, which is a club based out of Metuchen, New Jersey. And so that was kind of when my parents realized we have to take this a bit seriously. And so that included, paying the fees that it comes with playing at the club level, a lot of travel. We would practice at Rutgers, which was about like 40-ish minutes from my house. So for a couple of years, that was my parents driving me, my brothers driving me, until I could drive myself. So I played there from 14 to 18. And then after that, I went on to college, and I would still go back in the summers, and I would play in the UWS and the summer league. So I did play in high school as well. I went to St. John Vianney, a private Catholic school in New Jersey. And so in the fall season, I would play with my high school, and then we would start back up at FC Copa around probably like October, November. So it was full time, like from the time that I was young until now. It was nonstop.
And at what age did you realize that you wanted to take your game to the next level, that maybe you wanted to play collegiate or even professionally? How old were you when that kind of occurred to you, or maybe your parents?
Yeah. No, I think it happened for me at different times. So there was a time when I was in fifth grade where I tried to get onto FC Copa on my own, not realizing like what that means, like money and tryouts and stuff like that. And I was in contact behind my parents' back. I was in contact with a staff member trying to like get onto this club because I think I knew how seriously I took it, but like
Mm-hmm.
couldn't put that into words to explain to my parents. And like I said, I was one of three. Both my brothers were athletes. So, like, my oldest brother was a basketball player. My other brother was a swimmer. So, my parents were still pumping money into other sports as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think at about, uh, I don't know, maybe when I was, before I went into high school, someone said something to my mom one time at a game and was like, Sydney's pretty good. Like, she should play. She should go to a high school where they're, a good team. And my mom is not sports inclined at all. And she was very taken aback by that. And so I think that was maybe when she kind of started to take it seriously. And so I think we kind of made the executive decision as a family when we decided to go to like the actual club side when I was 14, that this was going to be something that I would pursue potentially in college. And my oldest brother is 4 years older than me, and he was pursuing potentially playing college basketball. So it was something that my parents were already kind of exposed to. So it helped that I was the youngest. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and then FC Copa really helped just in terms of like college exposure and all of that. So then when I got into college and I was just having so much fun, I never really thought about playing professionally. A couple girls did at Brown, but ultimately, it was when I was at Georgetown. So because of COVID, I had an extra year of eligibility, and I grad transferred to Georgetown. And I think it was probably like the fourth game of the season. We were playing down at University of Texas, and we beat them 2-0. It was a beautiful stadium, beautiful field, great game. And after the game, I kind of just sat there laying on the grass, and I was like, I don't want to give this up. Like, I don't want to stop doing this. I'm not ready. So I think that was probably the moment where I decided, I'm going to try to give this a go and try to play beyond just Georgetown, because that was my last year of eligibility in college.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome that you wanted to take that to the next level, because I know there's a lot of athletes and now more female athletes who are having that pathway open to them being able to go and play professionally, whether it's in the NWSL or somewhere abroad like you have done,
Yeah.
and Abby, your co-host. So it's really cool to see that we as I mean, when I was a youth player, I definitely didn't have a pro pathway really to go and play anywhere.
Yeah.
So I don't think it was really a realistic thing for me. I probably could have played in college if I had really wanted to, but I kind of was like, well, there's not really a reason to play in
Right.
college. I
Yeah.
wanted to focus on academics, so I kind of gave up my youth career when I was a junior so that I could focus more on my academics and going to college and, focusing on that, because I was like, I don't really at that age and that level for me, it wasn't really a well, where do you go after that? And so now it's awesome to see those pathways opening up for the players to be able to go, yeah, I can really go somewhere after this and it can take me somewhere. So that's awesome that you've been able to achieve that and do that. So going back to your youth career, when you decided that maybe you wanted to go play collegiate, at least, were you doing, because with FC Copa, it sounds like it was obviously a step up from just your town team,
Yes.
obviously.
Yeah.
Um, Definitely a lot more expectations, more trainings,
Yeah.
more of everything.
Yeah.
But was there outside stuff that you were doing on your own, just at home, training, skills, things that you did separate from your team trainings that you were doing to try and stay elevated?
Yeah, so a lot of the stuff that I did was on my own or with my oldest brother. Like that was just what my parents could afford. That was just kind of the act like what I had access to. Where I live, there was not like you needed a car to get anywhere. My mom worked in New York City. So she wasn't really home. My dad worked. So like even getting
Mm-hmm.
me when I was younger, even getting me to practice on time was always an issue. So I never really got the chance to do like private sessions or individual sessions. I didn't start doing those honestly until I was older. I could drive and I could pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely different depending on people's career. Whereas, like, I mean, Abby couldn't be on with us this recording. I know she'll jump on with you at a different time, but like Abby was able to do those things just based off of where she lived. Like it's just so much of it is just circumstance based off of how you grow up and what you basically have access to. Sometimes in terms of like geography, like something you really can't even control.
Mm-hmm.
So I did not do much outside of my team except for things on my own. In hindsight, do I think that that would have made me that much better? I'm not 100% sure. There are times now when I'll be training with a team in the NWSL, let's say, and there'll be a 17-year-old training as well. And I think, like, God, I would have killed for that. Like, I would have killed
Mm-hmm.
for that kind of exposure. And so things like that, I think, are really, really beneficial. And I think the reps of individualized trainings are really beneficial as well. I just think, like, for some people, it works really well. I'm not sure if I had the mentality at that age where I would want to, on top of all the other sessions I had, all the schoolwork I had. I just don't know if it would have been beneficial for me. So it worked out for me, but I understand how for some other people, like it worked out really well for Abby to have those individual sessions, which I'm sure she'll touch on.
Yeah. I mean, and my kids, like, I coach, my husband coaches, but when we're at home, our kids, we just kind of let them do whatever they want because we both coach our kids. I coach our daughters and he coaches our sons. And so when we're at home, if they want to play soccer, like my son will come over. We have all these green spaces around our house. And so, because we have really tiny yards, but we have open green spaces for
Mm-hmm.
the neighborhood to share. So he'll come up and he'll be like, "Hey, we want to go play soccer. Can we drag out the bow net?" And we're like, "Yeah, you have to set it up. Like, you have to put in the work to do it." And
Yeah,
so, because we don't want to go set it up and then them not use it. And
right.
so he'll go out there and he'll start playing. And then sometimes the other kids will go out there and start playing. So it's kind of fun to just see kids go out there and just train on their own too, just because they want to and because they love it. And
Yep.
you're still getting touches on the ball. So any touches on the ball are great, whether it's in a session, a one-on-one session with a personal trainer outside of your team, or if it's just in your backyard or in your house and you're juggling or passing with somebody. I mean, how was it? Because your brothers, you said, played basketball and swam.
Yeah.
So when you would play with them, like, how was it with them who didn't really play soccer, but you did?
Yeah. 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 My oldest brother, I mostly just played with my oldest brother. The middle one, swimming is very individualized and very intense. So he had a lot of his own kind of sessions, and swimming was his thing. So he didn't really
Mm-hmm.
like the other things. Whereas my oldest brother and I would, play basketball together, play soccer together, whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, I think the fact that, don't get me wrong, he's not Messi, but he can kick a ball. He's very athletic.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the age difference really helped me because he would get in goal and I would practice shooting, I would practice my touch, I would practice, whatever. And he would make saves just based off of pure athleticism. And because he's a boy, he
Mm-hmm.
has no problem diving in the air and falling on the ground, right?
Right.
So it was beneficial in the sense of him and I are very competitive. And he just kind of wanted to help me get better, and we would still have fun. And it was a sibling bonding thing. And so those things were always beneficial. And in hindsight, they're the things that like I remember the most at that age. Obviously, I remember my trainings with my friends, but it's kind of like those one-on-one sessions with my brother or with my dad that matter a lot. And even just something simple, like I would ask him to come outside, we would play basketball for 20 minutes, and then for 20 minutes he would throw a ball, I'd have to trap it, run to the end of the driveway. Like you just came up with stupid drills because you were a kid
Right.
and you had all that energy. So I'm very grateful for like what my family did in order to help me. And I think, again, in hindsight, like if we had known how serious I was going to end up taking it, I think my childhood would have been a little bit different. But I'm very happy about how it was.
Yeah. And you're kind of a case where, you know, you don't always have to shell out the hundreds of thousands of dollars extra to get those personal training sessions. You know, it's kind of a grit and determination thing as well. But it is also nice to have those controlled settings, you know, if there's something specific that you need to work on. But it can be done either way. Like,
Right.
you know, you see the kids in other countries who just go out and play in dirt and things like, so it doesn't always translate that, because I've seen players who go and spend money on the extra outside trainers outside of their teams.
Mhm.
And sometimes I'm like, I don't know if it's really making a difference. I'm not,
Yep.
so it really just depends, because does the player want to be doing those extra trainings? Is it something their parents are just signing them up for because they think they need it? I mean, there's always different reasons why it may or may not work for someone. So
Yeah.
it's not always the answer, but it's always a good help, because touches on the ball, any touches on the ball are great. I'm always for more touches,
Yeah.
definitely.
I think that's a mentality thing that like you'll see a difference between me and Abby. Like Abby at a young age could do the individualized sessions and they did make a difference and they did improve her game. At a young age, I don't think I could have done it because I felt like I had all these other things that I needed to focus on. And now that I'm older and I understand like the technical aspects of a game, like Abby took me when COVID happened, Abby and I were actually roommates at Brown and we went out one day and she just like went over hitting a ball a specific way with my left foot because I kept shanking it. And I was at a place where like I watched her do it twice, was able to digest it, and then could implement it. Whereas when
Mm-hmm.
I was 12, 14, I couldn't do that, but she could. And so I think it's also just like you were saying, sometimes it is just determination and grit, but sometimes it's just like your comprehension mentality. Like I
Mm-hmm.
could, but I didn't want to at that age. Abby could and wanted to. Like she really believed in that. So I definitely think it's about who the person is for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I definitely see that even just with me coaching different players, because
Yeah,
obviously I'm trying to have them do, all the same things. And whether one player can pick it up one way and another one, it takes them a couple extra tries or a couple extra weeks, to try and figure something out. So it's definitely different personalities and the way that they digest things and learn things and can receive it. And yeah, like you said, it took you two tries when you were older, and that when you were younger maybe it wouldn't have taken it all. You never
for
know.
sure. For sure.
So going back to when you were still youth playing and then you wanted to go collegiate, how did you start your recruiting and trying to figure out where you wanted to go to college? How was that for you, and who helped you and guide you kind of getting that done? Was it a coach? Was it a mentor? Was it somebody, just your parents? How did
Yeah.
that work out for you?
Yeah. So this was probably one of the reasons why FC Copa was just like the best move that me and my family could have done. The connection was actually my oldest brother's guidance counselor left his high school guidance counselor left to go work at FC Copa. So she went to join, and she actually became my assistant coach. So she joined the like founder of the program of the club, Roberto Aguas. So the two of them were my coach, Roberto and Lori, and he basically just had this philosophy about bettering the game, helping players get to college, but like actually helping. So they were so good in terms of getting us exposure to collegiate coaches. They would send us templates about what to send out to coaches, like here are the coaches that are coming to this tournament, make a list about who you want to contact. I mean, it's all on you, but they really helped, and they would say, here's a template, send this out to coach it, like personalize it, send it out to the coaches that you want, get them at your games. If there was a coach that you were really interested in, Roberta would try to get in contact with them. So SC Copa really helped, first by making you think about it, but then also doing the things to try to get you that exposure. Because at the time, there weren't all those NCAA rules about getting recruited. Like we were getting recruited at 15, 16.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it was really different and like something you had to think about very early on. So initially, it was conversations, like one-on-one conversations with the two of them, with my mom, and kind of just determining what I was looking for, what I wanted. And when I was 15, I didn't know. So I was going to these tournaments. I was having interest from college coaches. I would go on visits, and then I would turn down the offer. And Roberto just kind of like couldn't understand why I was turning down full rides to great universities, pretty good programs. Like why wasn't that enticing enough? And so I think that's another aspect where they kind of pushed me to understand like why wasn't that feeling right, and like what did I actually want out of my college career, like what was
Mm-hmm.
important to me. And for me it was academics. Like that was the number one thing for me. It wasn't actually soccer. I wanted to be at a university where I didn't feel like the smartest person in the room, because that was how I'd felt all growing up, and I really wanted to be challenged academically. And so that kind of like shaped the perspective then, where he was like, okay, so the schools that we need to look at need to be at that caliber. Like you need to find a way to mix that and the football side. So um, a lot of, I give so much credit to those two, Lori Berman and Roberto Aguas, because I feel like if I didn't make that move to FC Copa, if I didn't have them in my corner, I wouldn't have been able to do it, because my brother ended up playing Division 3 basketball for 2 years, but the way that his college process went about versus the way mine went about, like night and day. And
Mm-hmm.
just like that hands-on help was so beneficial. Like they would host college night where you could talk to college coaches, you could talk to players that had graduated from the academy side and were now playing in college. What's that like? To even decide if you even wanted to play in college, because not everybody does.
Right.
Um, so that was like massive and helping me like formulate the ideas about like, okay, I'm going to be 18 soon. What do I want to do next?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds like you had an awesome support system. And like you said, I mean, not everybody has access to that. So props out there to all of the coaches and administrators and people that are out there helping athletes in general get to the colleges that they want to do and being able to assist them, because it's a huge deal. I
For
know
sure.
that I know some coaches, my husband included, who when a player tells them, you know, I want to play college soccer, and they say, I want to go wherever, most of the time the coaches that I know, they will do what they can to assist them in getting them the exposure and the ins with those colleges that they want to try and get to. And so it, you know, it's always great to hear those coaches that are able to do that and assist them and get them to reaching those goals that they want. And I really like that they asked you why you were turning down those offers, because you know you had to recalibrate and say why, you know, what is it that you need, because like I've had other people on the podcast who, you know, they went on visits and they were like, I do or don't like the environment of the school, what
Yep.
attracts me, what turns me off on this place, like just being in that environment and going, this will work for me or this won't work for me when you go on those college visits. And so that's always very important to see the environment that you're going to be in and whether you're going to be able to handle being in the areas that you're in, whether it's a climate thing or whatever. Like I have an older brother who went to a really small town college and played soccer, and I think for him, and I still have to interview him about his experience, but just being his younger sister and seeing the type of personality that he was and growing up in the area that we were, and then him going to such a small town, I feel like that had a great effect on him, because he's more of a, to me at the time, was more of a big city kind of a guy. And so I
Yeah.
felt like he should have been going to a bigger college where there was a bigger campus or a bigger city local to him, where when he went to the college that he went to, it was kind of a small town thing. So I think that was a hard adjustment for him. So definitely looking at environments as well is important. So tell us, when you went from your youth academy days, or you know, your youth days, and then transferring up into college, what were the biggest shocks for you and the biggest adjustments, just soccer wise, not even educationally, but
Yeah.
just the
Not life.
transitions of, you know, like I know living on your own is hard and things like that, and we'll get
Yeah.
into that
Yeah.
later. But what were the biggest shocks for you as far as transitioning from your youth career to your collegiate career?
Yeah. This is probably shocking. Not much. Um, the environment that was cultivated for me specifically at the club level prepared me so greatly for college. I was held to a very high standard. Um, we didn't explicitly have captains, but I was looked at as one of the leaders on my youth side, and I was held to a very high standard. My coach and I had a very personal relationship, where he helped me just be a better person, and he would push very hard mentally. And my dad was a athlete as well, and my parents raised us very, I don't want to say strict, but like pretty strict. And so that discipline aspect that I feel like shocks a lot of people when you get to college did not shock me at all. I would
Mm-hmm.
honestly say the thing I struggled with the most my freshman year initially was just like the comfort level of playing on a new team, like learning a new style, being a nobody. So it's like that pyramid that everybody talks about. You go from being the top dog at the level you were at to the highest level, the new level, and you're the bottom. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so that was a bit of an adjustment in the beginning, but not, it probably sounds so conceited and so cocky, but like it honestly, it didn't last very long. I got really lucky my freshman year, the starting center back, we, so the first day you run a fitness test and we pull up to the track at 6 a.m. Everybody gets out of the cars. People are so nervous. Like this test matters so much. And the starting center back, the senior, gets out of the car in a boot. So she had a stress fracture. And so I ended up getting really lucky because the person who I basically was recruited to take over for was hurt my first year. And
Mm-hmm.
so I kind of just had to step up immediately. And so I didn't really have the time to like panic, or I didn't have the time to like fail to adjust, which was probably
Mm-hmm.
best for me. So honestly, the thing I struggled with the most was that fitness test the first day. I failed my fitness test my freshman year by, I think I failed it by like 3 seconds or something ridiculous my freshman year. And it was kind of just like dealing with that disappointment. Like that was like a really big failure to me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because the rule that at the time that our coach had was if you didn't pass it, you couldn't start. And so I had this weight on my shoulders where here was this starting center back who's in a boot, like I have to start.
Mm-hmm.
And I failed the fitness test. So it was kind of just like overcoming that. And I think I stepped into an environment where people were really welcoming of like the way that I played, and the style fit really well. And my head coach and I gelled very well as well. So like I had that benefit. But I would say it's like the basic things, like the fitness, the physicality, the speed of play. But I think you either adjust very quickly or you get left behind. And I kind of had no choice if I wanted to play, and I wanted to play.
Mm-hmm. And what does the fitness test entail for those people that don't know?
Yeah, so different teams do very different things. I would say common ones are probably like the beep test, the yo-yo test, the man U test. Those are probably the common ones.
Mm-hmm.
At Brown, our head coach Kia McNeil does this track fitness test. It's morphed over the years, but it's a track fitness test where it basically is a, obviously it's a test of your endurance, your stamina, but it's such a mental test. So for us, you had to run half a mile, and then you had to do shuttles. Then you had to run a quarter mile, do shuttles, and then do it all backwards. So shuttles again, quarter mile, shuttles, and a half mile. And I definitely recommend you ask Abby about this because this test haunted Abby for 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's mentally, it's physically taxing, of course, but it's mentally very difficult when you think about, like, because we would run it in groups. So if you weren't the first group to run, you're watching everybody run. There's just like normal test anxiety because you know like what's riding on it, even though you've been
Mm-hmm.
practicing all summer. It always rained. It always rained the day before, so the track was always wet, and so you're worried about sliding, and just different things. So that was what our fitness test was, and the times were at about a sub 6 mile pace. So the 800s had to be run in 2:55 for the first one and 3:05 for the last one, and the quarter miles were a minute 30. So it was definitely physically taxing, but such a good way to always start the year because it's terrible. You get it out of the way, but Kia has the philosophy, which is a philosophy I definitely agree with as a coach. Like, if you're not fit, nothing else matters. Like, if you can't
Mm-hmm.
play 90 minutes, I don't care how technical you are on a ball because you're only going to last for 10, and that doesn't help me. So, I think fitness really carried our program when we didn't have, because when Kia took over, she took over Abby's first year. Abby's first year was Kia's first year as well. So she can talk more about like that first year. But at
Mm-hmm.
the time, like the recruits weren't hers yet. They weren't Kia's recruits yet. So you're getting people that aren't maybe like the most technical players that you wanted to bring in. So you have to really balance that by like, if we're not going to be the most technical team, we're going to be the most fit team. until I can
Mm-hmm.
get like the technical players in and it can mesh, which we ended up doing. And then we won the league in 2019. So it's just a matter of mixing that and fitness set the foundation, and it sucked, but it was good.
And I'm a person like I could play a full 90-minute game, no problem. I was a defensive midfielder, a center back, a left back or right back. Um, but I hated like whenever we had to just run or
Yeah,
like I couldn't do it, but I could play a full 90. Like
yeah,
it wasn't a problem for me. But like I hate run. Like even to this day, when I go exercise, like I hate running. I'm like, I will do a bike. I will do a, what are the other things called?
the elliptical, the
Yeah.
stairmaster, like
Yeah, I'll
literally
do
anything else.
anything but a treadmill. Like I
Yeah,
can't stand a
yeah,
treadmill or just running. Like I'm like, nope, it's not me. I'm not gonna do that. So give me something else and I'll do that. But treadmills, they're boring or just running. I don't like it. I had a friend that ran a marathon and I'm just like, good luck to you. I hate running. Like it's not my thing. But obviously as soccer players we run. I was just watching an episode of Welcome to Wrexham, and they were talking about how they were tracking, I think it was the captain, and he ran like 8.3 miles in a game, or that's his
yeah,
average or something. And I'm like, I don't think people understand like how far soccer players run,
yeah,
especially midfielders. Like
yeah.
they track a lot of distance, and so it's always crazy to see those kinds of stats because I'm like, I don't feel like I ran that much in a
Right.
game, maybe a few miles, but not eight.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
he's
No,
also a professional athlete.
yeah, I feel like that's the thing about fitness testing. Like it's more so the anxiety of it, right? Because like obviously you can run, like you hate it, but
Yeah.
you can do it, and you do
Yeah.
it when you play 90 minutes, way more than you ever do in a fitness test. Like that fitness test that we did was 20 minutes total, and that included the rest time as well. And so it's like in the grand scheme of things, that's such a small portion of a game that you're actually playing. And
Yeah.
so that's why we would talk about all the time the mental piece of it, because when you're doing that last level, when you're doing that last half mile and you're gassed and you've passed every single level to that point, like why would you want to fail that last level? Like that's the last 10 minutes of the game when you're tied 1-1 and you need to win, or whatever, you have heavy legs, and like then your brain starts to go and all of that. So it definitely relates. I feel like I can say this now that I no longer have to run these tests, which I feel like when you get to Abby and I are actually talking about this recently, like when you get to the pro level, especially when you're in a different country, the expectation around fitness is so different. Like you don't really test it because it's just like the foundation.
Expected.
It's expected. Like if you don't have that, goodbye. Like there's no point of even having a conversation. You'll never touch the field. And so obviously there's still some testing. Like people still run tests. When I got drafted in the NWSL, I had to run a test in preseason, and I ran a preseason test when I was in Australia. And so you still do it, but it's not. It's just the mentality behind it is just very different than it is in college, especially in the NCAA system where it prides itself so much. Like I feel like it's so much about like running as punishment and running to run, and
Right.
running just because, and for no purpose, just because you're an athlete. And so, oh, it just makes sense. Let's have you run today. So I think the beneficial thing about, at least at Brown, when we did that test, it was basically so that we didn't have to worry about that stuff later on. Obviously we still ran, but not in a way where it was like, okay guys, today we're running this. Like no, it
Right.
was, if you did small sided and your team lost by 3 goals, you ran 3 sprints, done and done. But because you were already fit, and then you're playing games, and that just keeps you more fit. So you kind of have to come in at the peak, and then just continue to go up from there.
And before we move on to your professional career, so while you were at Brown, you met Abby, who is the co-host
Yes.
of the Megged podcast.
Yes.
So tell kind of how you guys met a little bit, just so people are familiar with you two, and then we'll kind of go into how you got into your professional career.
Yeah, so Abby's a year older than me. So Abby was there. Abby was a sophomore when I came in my freshman year. And we really didn't talk much that fall. She had her friends. I got in with different friends when I first came in. But I have no problem saying this. Abby was the most technical player on that team that year. And so I feel like you naturally just end up gravitating towards good players. And so she was someone that I had looked up to. She was someone who, she was pretty quiet at that time. But like on the field, she was somebody who, you wanted to play with, you wanted her on your team, or whatever the case may be. And then we had a decent season my first year. And then that spring season is when her and I we took a class together. And that's when we actually ended up becoming friends, because we would go from practice in the morning to our 9 a.m. class together. And so that was how we ended up becoming friends. And then my next year, so her junior year, my sophomore year, we ended up, I don't even know how it happens. Like you never really know, but we ended up
Mm-hmm.
becoming very, very close. The next year we lived together. We were captains together. So it's just kind of one of those things that you look around one day and you're like, hey, we're friends now. No idea how
Yeah.
that happened, but now I call her every single day and we talk every single day.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just kind of one of those things where we were so different. Abby and I are so, so different, and it just works for us.
Yeah. And if you guys listen to the Meg podcast, you can definitely tell their different personalities by just their different opinions on certain subjects. So it's always interesting to hear, especially from you guys, and being so close and such good friends and for all these years and everything. So it's really cool to be able to see you guys, debate your different
Yeah.
sides on things. So going back to, so you're playing in Texas in that game and you decided, I want to keep this going. So what steps did you take at the end of your collegiate season to try and get to a professional level? What were the steps you took, or the people you reached out to, or did your coach Kia help you? How did that
Yeah.
come about for you being able to go and play abroad?
Yeah, so Kia and I remained very close, even though I ended up ultimately leaving and going to play at Georgetown for my last year. And she actually, someone reached out to her, I think while I was still at Brown, I'm not 100% sure. So before I even went for my grad year, about representation. And so I ended up speaking when I decided, okay, like maybe this is what I want to do. Kia always was pushing it. Like she was always like, you're way too good to stop after college. And so she kind of just waited, because obviously she understands what it's like. You're I didn't have the mental capacity to think about playing professionally seriously while I was still competing in games twice a week,
Right.
with Georgetown. And so ultimately, I had a couple agents reach out to me about representation. And I kind of just put them off, because I was like, I don't even know what you're discussing. And I have a game tomorrow. Like, this is just not
Mm-hmm.
where I need to be at right now. And so when my season was getting to the near end, like when you're playing in your conference tournament and then you're playing in the NCAA tournament and you're like you're not having games as often, is when I started to give it that kind of thought. I had conversations with a couple of agents in deciding, what does this even look like? Because Abby was playing professionally at that time, so she was my sounding board, but Abby also went to play professionally during COVID. So it was
Mm-hmm.
like a very weird experience, and she was in Lithuania. Um, Initially, and then she was in Iceland, and she'll obviously talk about these experiences with you, but it was just like, I didn't want to go to Lithuania, I didn't want to go to Iceland, and so it was kind of just like, I don't really know what to do. And then it's like, do I trust these agents? And I didn't know other people that were playing professionally. It wasn't a massive thing coming out of Brown. And so I just like didn't really know what to do. And so I talked a lot with my club coach, I talked a lot with Roberto, I talked a lot with my parents about what I wanted to do. Kind of just sat and thought to myself, like, okay, I have two amazing degrees. Um, how long do I plan on doing this? Like, I just had to have a really honest conversation with myself. Ultimately, I decided to enter the NWSL draft, because at the time I thought it was the right decision. I wanted to stay in the area, like I wanted to stay in the States.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you're coming out of the college game, it just seems like the most least intimidating thing to do, to like go to the next level in the US. Hindsight 2020, if I could do it over again, I would not enter the draft. I would have gone overseas immediately.
Mm-hmm.
I think just given now that I've played in the NWSL a couple times with a couple different teams, it's a very hard league to crack into, especially if you're not drafted in the top, I would probably say, 2 rounds.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very hard league to crack into. And I don't think I knew. I've been watching soccer forever. Like I watch all leagues. I don't have a team, so it makes it really easy for me to watch like unbiased and just watch
Mm-hmm.
anybody. But I think I didn't realize how different certain leagues were until I actually stepped foot in them. So like the NWSL is super transitional, and that's just like not my game. And so I didn't know that until I got into it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was obviously a great learning experience. So I ended up ultimately getting drafted. I went to Louisville, Kentucky for preseason, ended up not getting a contract. And that whole experience, I think I was there for about like 8-ish weeks, maybe. And that whole experience was a story in and of itself. And then like kind of facing that adversity where you struggle, you're not on a team, but you kind of committed to doing this thing and you don't want to give it up. Like, is that how your
Mm-hmm.
career ends? And, all of this. And then ultimately, I think going overseas was the best decision. But lucky enough, the NWSL is kind of what gave me the opportunity to do that. After things didn't work out with Louisville, I ended up at a I don't know how to explain it, kind of like they call it a national team replacement contract. So when there's a FIFA window, players on the national teams leave for extended periods of time, you can bring players in to sign them for that window.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up going for Naomi Girma was playing with the U.S. obviously, and so I went to San Diego on a national team replacement contract. And the exposure and the quality that I had there ultimately, I think, is what got me to Australia. And then
Mm-hmm.
playing in Australia got me back into the NWSL, and then that got me over to Scotland. So it's obviously all like what gets you to what, and sometimes you make the wrong move, and then you have to adjust. But um, I would say long-winded answer of saying like I didn't really have a lot of people to rely on. Abby and I kind of just really have each other. Like we're each other's sounding boards in terms of this is what I'm dealing with. What do I do about this? As someone that goes through it, but so much of it, honestly, trial and error. It's just
Mm-hmm.
trial and error. And in 20 years, I'm sure I'll regret some of the things that I did, and I'll be happy about some of the other things that I did.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really cool experience for you to be able to even go and play with the NWSL, and then you went and played over in Australia and you were there for a year and a half. Is that
I think it ended up being, I think it was just a year. I think it
just
like
a year?
was just short of a year. Yeah.
And what team did you play for in Australia? So you played for the Wave, San Diego Wave, right?
Yeah.
And then
Yes.
and then you went over to Australia. And what team did you play for there, or club?
I played for Western United. So they were actually in their inaugural season last season. So I was playing for an expansion team, which has growing pains, like trying to make itself in the league, not having the same legacy that a team like, for example, Sydney FC does,
Mm-hmm.
just in terms of exposure and name and all of that stuff. But it was great. We ended up coming in second when we were supposed to come in last, that we were picked to come last. So that was a great experience. And it was just nice to finally be back in an environment where you're like start to finish completing a season.
Mm-hmm. And I was listening to one of your Megged episodes where you were like, I've been back in the States for 2 weeks and I got sick. Like, because you were over in Australia and then you were like, and now I'm back in the States and I'm already sick. Like, I actually thought that was hilarious.
Yes, yeah. The moment I came back to the States, I got sick, and I did not get sick once when I was in Australia. And I was like, I'm just like allergic to American air. Like I'm just not supposed to be here.
Yeah, my husband, anytime we, because he travels obviously a lot for coaching, and so he'll go elsewhere. California, we're on the West Coast, so it's usually West Coast places. And then he comes back and he's like, I know I'm home because I've already sneezed 3 times, like
Yep,
since I've, driven into the state or flown into the state. Like he's like, I don't know what it is about our air. Like it's super funny.
yep.
Because he's kind of the same way. He's like his allergies go haywire and whatever. But I thought that was funny. And then, what team did you come back to the Wave, or did you go to a different NWSL?
Yeah, so I actually ended up coming back to the Wave because I was in that awkward like don't know what I'm doing next. They offered because the again national team replacement contract with the World Cup, so I was like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I mean, I had a great time last time I was there. It was I think when I left the first time, I was playing the best I'd ever played. It's playing under Casey Stoney and like getting that exposure and getting that knowledge, like you can't put a price on that. So I was like, yeah, absolutely. My friends are there. I'll go back. And then when I was there, I had an opportunity actually to go play in Europe, different than where I am now. And it ended up falling through. And it was very difficult because I'd committed to that. I had signed a contract. I let San Diego know I was leaving. I was prepared to like go move to this place, play for this team. For I signed a 2-year contract, and that falling through was really difficult to deal with because the thing that like nobody really tells you about when you decide like, oh, I'm going to play pro is like transfer windows and like when teams are looking versus when teams are not looking. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I signed this contract, I committed to playing with this team. The time it took from when I signed to when it fell through, like all that time is time that you would be looking for another team, but you
Mm-hmm.
can't. Like you're signed, sealed, delivered. Like you think you're good, and then when it
Right.
falls through, I had a very short window to try to find something else. I think we talk about it a little bit on Megged. Like Abby and I really struggle when we come back. You really struggle when you're like not playing with the team. You really struggle with the unknown. That's probably one of the most difficult parts about being a professional footballer. Like a lot of times your life and like your career and like your happiness is not up to you to decide, and that can be
Mm-hmm.
really difficult. So I also ended up I was training with Gotham. So when that all fell through, and then I was kind of just stuck. I didn't know where I was going, what was going to happen. Gotham trains about 60 miles from my parents' house, and so again, sacrifice that my parents make. I don't have a car. My mom literally had just leased a new car, and there I was putting 120 miles on it every single day.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I was training there, and then luckily enough, sometimes things just happen like that and they just fall into your lap and you don't really know how and you don't know why. And then ultimately I ended up coming to Scotland and signing with Celtic. So I do definitely think everything happens for a reason, as cliche as that is, but like those little periods where you don't know what comes next, or something doesn't go your way, or you sign for this club and it's completely different than what you thought, like those little things are so difficult to deal with in a career. Whereas like when you decide, okay, I'm going to Brown, you're there for 4 years. Obviously, you could decide to transfer, but like you're there
Mm-hmm.
for 4 years, and it's kind of like you work to get your spot, and there you go. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
really difficult then when you're at the professional level, and it's like, you're good, you're really good, but you're just like not what we're looking for. Or you're on a team and you feel like you're doing everything right, you're getting positive feedback, but you're not playing. Or you do
Mm-hmm.
everything right, you sign that contract, and for some reason it falls through. So there's definitely way more adversity at the professional level that you just like don't always see coming, and you just have to deal with when it comes.
Yeah. And I was, again, watching a Welcome to Wrexham episode, and it was just about the keepers, the different keeper things that they had going on. They had a keeper get injured, the backup goalies there, and then they the original keeper that got injured, he came back, and then he got injured again, like almost immediately, like, and which was just so crazy. We were watching this, and I was like, oh my gosh. He tore his, and when I saw it, I tore my ACL, and when I was watching the episode, I was like, oh my gosh, he tore his MCL. Like, just knowing like the different knee things that they do to your leg, and
Yeah,
I was just like, it's
yeah,
totally that ligament. And he had been on turf, and anyway, so the emotional stuff of that, especially as a soccer player, knowing that there's the opportunity for injury or whatever, and so again, the unknown is always really difficult, and the mental side of it is really difficult for players to understand. And hopefully on podcast episodes that I've had, and I know you guys have talked about it, just the mental aspect of it, making sure that you're getting the help that you need as far as whatever could be bothering you. Like, just talking about it more will help you feel better. I know, like, even just with my own personal experience, like, I expressed how I was feeling at one time, and I basically got shut down. In the 90s, mental health like was almost non-existent, like
yeah,
assistance for certain things, especially for kids. Being a youth player and going, I was like super overwhelmed and going through all this stuff. I probably could have used a therapist or somebody just to talk
Yeah.
through all
Yeah.
the stuff that I was going through. And so as elite athletes, it's good to see that teams and players are getting more of that support on the mental aspect of it, making sure that you are okay as far as what's going on. But I think sometimes, like you're saying, when you're in that in between, you can get lost. And so making sure that you have a good support system, whether it's family, friends, a therapist, just helping you work through those emotions and issues, so that you don't get lost in it. Because I know it can be overwhelming,
Yeah.
especially for young players. If you're trying to achieve these great things and you're in your early to mid 20s or whatever, trying to navigate this stuff, and it's something that you're not familiar with, and the people around you are not familiar with it either. So
Yep.
sometimes it's really hard for people to go, I don't know how to help you.
Yeah,
And that's always really difficult
for
to
sure.
navigate.
Yeah, I would say that's probably I have no problem saying this. I feel like Abby probably has saved me so many times relative to mental health and dealing with all of that unknown, because she knows firsthand everything that I'm going through and vice versa. And that really makes a difference, because my dad is so supportive, my mom is so supportive, and they'll try, and I'm like, they'll ask me one question and I snap. I'm like, you don't understand. Like, you don't get it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know how to explain it to you. Like, you're not at the practices. You're not dealing with what I deal with. Like, you just don't get it. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really important to have, like, for me, it's Abby. Like, that's my support system. Like, it works really well for me. I know she has me, of course, but she also has someone else that she goes to. And so it's just finding, like, who works for you, what works for you. Like, stepping away from the game sometimes is really beneficial, doing other things, which seems like people are like, oh, that's so weird. Like, you're a professional soccer player, you're supposed to like do nothing else but soccer, and that's
Mm-hmm.
just not true. So I think that mental aspect is definitely something that is so much more difficult at the professional level, but it's also like that much more important. Like, I'm glad that I have to deal with that kind of stuff, because like that's life, and that's really important to make sure you have that support system forever.
Yeah. And I was just having a conversation with another coach just about having to overcome adversity and find those trials, or not necessarily find them, but you're going through them and you point them out and you see them, and tackling them head on and being able to overcome them. That's a
Yeah.
huge thing and a huge growth as a person versus just giving up on them.
Yep.
At least try and overcome them and figure out how to work through them and do what you can to navigate through them, however you need to. Is I mean, that can be for any sport. Holding the accountability and making you a better human being
Yep.
because you've gone through that stuff. So I always feel like that's always a plus. And I don't think I've talked to any athletes who have just had a smooth sailing ride going from one
No.
rank to another. So they're going to pop up. And so for those of you that are listening, don't think that, I mean, obviously Sydney is a good example of, it's not going to be a smooth ride, and there's going to be bumps in the road, and there's going to be the unknown. And so it's okay. It's not going to be the end of everything. So just write it out, wait it out, whatever you need to do. But it doesn't necessarily have to be the end unless you want it to be. I mean, if you
Yeah.
want it to be the end, that could always be your decision. But it's always interesting to hear the different avenues that people have to take, especially different the men's side versus the women's side. It's always very different. The avenues are different. The opportunities are different. And so it's always interesting to hear what those differences are and how, I mean, I feel like it's also very similar to, I have another player who kind of did something similar, played collegiate, got drafted in the MLS draft, didn't get signed, but trained with a team, went and played over in Europe at a couple of different clubs, and then he got injured. And so because of injuries and then COVID, he wasn't able to continue playing.
Hmm.
But it was kind of a very similar avenue that you guys have taken, trying to play domestic and then going abroad.
Yep.
And it's really cool to see, though, the people from the States being able to go and play abroad. I mean, and vice versa. I mean, we've obviously, at least at my local colleges, I've seen players come in and play collegiate that are
Yep.
foreign players, and it's becoming more and more common. I don't know necessarily if that's great for our talent from the States, having those foreign players take spots on teams, but that's an issue for another day. I mean, if they deserve the spot, they deserve the spot.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's always fair, especially coming from a coach. If they if they make the spot, they make the spot. So, but do you have any advice for players out there today looking to go play either collegiate or professionally that you want to give?
I think my main advice would kind of just be like, just commit to whatever it is that you aspire to do. So if you want to play collegiately, like just commit to what that is and what that means, because it's difficult and it's not sunshines and rainbows. I was actually just talking to the U18s here at Celtic, and me and another girl were speaking to them, and I think we shocked them a little bit to kind of say, like, it's not all it's cracked up to be. Like, they were talking about, oh, I don't have much of a social life, and I was like, you don't, that's not going to improve when you decide to go play professionally. I missed one of my best friend's weddings because I went on trial in San Diego, like, and that was a sacrifice and a decision ultimately that I made. But like, it kind of gets harder because then at the professional level, at least, like, and at the collegiate level, because you're talking about a scholarship, but like money's involved and like that financial burden as well, which again, topic for another day. You could talk about that for hours. So ultimately my advice would be like, decide what you want, be realistic with yourself in that decision, but commit to that. So commit to the struggles, commit to the happy times, like, because it's not something that you'll get back, right? Like, I treasure my collegiate experience. I had no idea that I would have a completely different relationship with football as a professional versus a collegiate athlete. And I'm really happy that I took advantage of my time as a collegiate athlete, that I loved my time. I embraced it because it's very different now as a professional. So my advice would be commit and then figure out what you need to do, right? Like, if you want to play professionally, have honest conversations with a coach. What do I need to do? Because honestly, I kind of was just told, like, you're good, you're good, you're good. And then it wasn't until I started playing professionally that it was like, you're good, but you can't do this. You, like, we're looking for this and you can't do, like, you don't bring that to us. And it was like, okay, like, I have something that someone's concretely told me you need to work on this. Whereas before it was me thinking, all right, I think that I need to work on this and I could do better at this. But I never got like that super direct feedback because I did everything I needed to do at the collegiate level. And I probably should have seeked that out when I decided, okay, I'm going to go play professionally. I should have looked into, what am I missing? Like, what do I need to be honest with myself about? And so those would kind of be my two things: commit and get the feedback.
Yeah, that's really good advice. You kind of talked about it with your own story as far as like committing. Also, when you're committing to whatever it is you want to do, define it. Like, what do you want to do? Like you had to do with your collegiate decision where you wanted to go. You had to just, define it more as to what college you wanted to go to. So not necessarily the one, but the type of college that you wanted to go to. So make sure that you don't leave that super broad. As it comes closer, you got to start narrowing it down. You go, okay, I want to play collegiate, and then you got to narrow down those steps as to how you're going to get there and what your expectations are or goals are as far as specific things. So that's great advice. And I didn't even ask this earlier on in the episode, and so I'm a little embarrassed, but for those people that haven't listened to your podcast, what position do you specifically play?
I'm a center back. Probably should have mentioned that initially when I gave the whole spiel about what I do. Yes, I'm a center back, true and true. If anyone ever ends up listening to Megged, you will hear the very different perspectives that Abby and I have, because Abby is an attacking player and I am a defensive player, and we simply can never agree on certain principles because we just have different brains and they work differently. So I am a center back through and through. I've honestly never played anything else. I never want to play anything else. It is my happy place.
I played defensively when I played, and I feel like, at least in my mind, and my daughter's kind of the same way, you naturally gravitate towards that and you see the field differently. Like you were mentioning on your podcast, the preventative measures that you're putting in place where you're playing as a player. And so I feel like I did that as well. So kindred spirit, definitely. Where I feel, I mean, and it could be for any position. Like I've noticed the goalkeepers that I know, they all have kind of a different personality. The
Yes.
goalkeepers that I
Yes.
know, and it works. Like I don't know what it is, but the goalkeepers that I work with as youth, the players that love to play it, they all seem to have a similar personality, and so that's not necessarily a bad thing. But it is kind of interesting to see like the different players that have that different perspective and thought process. Like I said, my daughter, she naturally gravitates towards that defensive edge of as well, and so I find that very interesting. That's kind of a similar thing as far as players and their perspectives on the game. I mean, obviously, you have to have the different perspectives, respectively, for the different positions. Like I suck at an offensive player because I'm thinking too defensively and not so much attacking. And I like, even when I played in co-ed leagues when I was an adult, they would have me play up because it was co-ed and the guys were like,
Yeah.
yeah, we'll
Yeah.
play defense, that kind of a thing. And then at least the co-ed indoor leagues that I played in, like it was 2 points if a female scored. And so they
Oh,
would
wow.
basically just kick the ball off of me. So I was
Yeah.
actually the leading scorer for like 2 seasons or something because they would basically just knock the ball off of me and it would go in the goal.
Oh my
But
God.
I'm like, I am not an attacking player in any way.
Yeah.
But they would have me play that. I mean, and it was just, I mean, the field vision, like I'm a person that also, like, when I go into a room, I have to sit at the back of the room. I don't like to sit at the front. Are you ever that way when you go into like a room of people? I thought it was.
I'm not.
See, in like I like a classroom, just any type of a room, I always have to sit at the back. And so I was like, I wonder if that was like a thing that I had before I played defense. Like I've always had that where I want to be in the back, or was it?
You know what? I actually, okay, so before, okay, so I said how Abby and I had that 9 a.m. class together. I
Hmm.
used to sit in the back. I actually did. I used to sit on the back or kind of off to the side because I don't have the best vision. So I would kind of sit like off to the side, but like still a little bit in the back. And Abby is a front row sitter. Abby sits in the front directly. Like she doesn't like the distractions behind her. She sits in the front. When Abby and I then became friends and we would like go to class together and we would sit together at class, she was like, I'm sitting in the front. And I was like, okay, well, I sit over here. And she was like, okay, well, if you're going to sit with me, we're sitting in the front. So I was like, all right. So I started sitting in the front. And it was honestly after I met Abby and started hanging out with Abby, I started sitting in the front. So you might be onto something because Abby is that attacking mindset. And I adjusted because I was friends with her. So it is definitely possible. I'm not knocking it like I was before, but it's possible.
Yeah, I don't know. Like my daughter, she also prefers to sit in the back of a room.
Yeah.
She's also one that gets distracted really easily.
Mhm.
So I think that might have something to do with it. But I usually tell her teachers like she prefers to sit on the side or in the back, not necessarily in the middle.
Mhm.
So I do find that very interesting.
That's
But
funny.
that's an interesting correlation.
Yeah.
At least I think so. If it's true, I don't. There's no scientific proof. I am not a professional in any way, so that's just me noticing whatever it is that I'm
Just
noticing.
two opinions.
Yeah. Speaking of opinions, and I don't know, I had emailed Abby. Do you have a hot take that you want to do, or do you? I don't know if she.
A hot take. I don't have one off the top of my head. I feel like Abby and I kind of like made our podcast based off of our hot takes because we never, ever, ever agree on the same thing. I would probably, if I had a hot take, what would my hot take be? Honestly, relative to what we were discussing, my hot take, I think it would be a hot take for some people, not a hot take for some. My hot take, kind of also going off of like advice, would be for those that are deciding, where they want to go collegiately, pick your school based off of everything apart from your sport. And I think that that's probably a hot take because the reason why you're going there is to play soccer. However, there's so many other aspects to the collegiate life that if you're like you're only on the field for a couple hours a day. So if you're not happy with the academics, if you're not happy with the people, if you're not happy with the location, and all of those things that will really affect your mental health, which will then affect the way you play. And I think when you're 16, 17 getting recruited, you can't understand that. And when you're maybe 18, 19 dealing with that, it's really difficult. And so my hot take would be for those people deciding where they want to go to school, make all of your decisions based off of everything separate from sports. Obviously, you have to keep the sports in mind, but the main decisions separate from the sports.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I can't remember who it was that I had on the podcast previously, but they basically gave similar advice. Like, if you had to stop playing your sport, are you
Yeah,
going to be happy with the school that you're at without the sport? You
for
know, if
sure.
you get injured or whatever it could be, you know, if you decide to not play anymore, like, are you going to be happy with the school that you're at? And so I totally agree with that. I'm not going to argue with you on that one at all. I tried to think of my own hot take.
It's hard.
Yeah, like, and you guys usually keep your hot takes. I don't really say like more of a professional level, and I was thinking it more of like the youth level, like
Oh, that's fine.
like the mine is I don't like teams that get into lines at the end of a game and like high five each other.
Agreed.
I feel like that's super old and outdated.
Do they still do that?
Some in my area, some people do, some people don't. I had a little thing that happened at the end of one of my games I was coaching, and ever since the end of COVID, usually, and because my husband has his boys, he's had his boys teams do it for a long time, where after the game they'll, you know, cheer the other team's name and then they'll go clap, like they'll go past the other team's parents across the field and the other team's bench, and they'll clap and then they'll come back over,
Okay.
but they don't really like high five each other or anything like that.
Okay.
Where old school, you stand in two lines and you walk down the line and you high five each other, like what the professionals do before the game, you know.
Yeah.
I feel like after the game, emotions are running high no matter what level it is. One team's going to be more excited than the other depending on what the score of the game was. And anyway, so after my game, the other team started to line up. My team did the cheer and they started running and doing our regular thing. And so the other team's parents like got offended that we weren't giving them high fives. And so I had to have a talk with my team afterwards. And I'm like, yes, I know we do this, but if another team lines up, just do it, you know. And I had to explain to their coach, I was like, you know, and they were very understanding. They were like, oh yeah, I get it. Like, we're not the only team that does it. I know we're not the only
Right.
team in the
Right.
area that does it. I've seen other teams do it in our division. So I'm like, it can't be a new thing. And this wasn't at the beginning of the season. So I was like, I know it's not something they haven't seen happen. So, but yeah, that was my hot take on
No,
at
I
least
think
youth sports, because obviously professionals don't do it.
yeah, no, the reason why I think it's a good one is because like you don't do it at the professional level. Like you just at the end of the game, like you just hit hands with people on the field. It's not very organized, but it's still respectful, and you'll clap to fans and you know whatever the case may be. And I think there's nothing wrong with mimicking that at the youth level at all. Like I think it probably is honestly it's a bit more personal because you're not just doing it because you have to, right? You don't just line up in the line because you have to. So I think
Right.
that's a good one. Well done, good job, Katie.
Thanks. Yeah, I did. I was literally just sitting there like stewing. I was like, what one could I bring up that maybe they haven't covered that could maybe translate? I know you guys talked on one of your episodes about one of your hot takes was having everybody go out for the anthem, and it was kind of a either or
Mm,
thing, that you guys talked about on the professional level, obviously. And so I was like, well, I don't know if that's too close, but I was like, I think more youth level, because a lot of the people that listen to the podcast are parents of youth players or just youth players. I would also be interested to hear what other people do in other areas for youth teams as far as like pre or post game, like cheers and talks. Like, I know my husband's the older teams that he coaches, when they go out, you know, they do the international walkout before certain games, and then they, you know, high five each other before the game, and then that's kind of it. And then after the game, they'll go and, you know, like the professional thing. It's more like a professional thing. But at the younger
yeah.
ages, they don't really mimic it that much. Sometimes they do in tournaments, but like just the league levels, I feel like it's a little bit different. And I wish it would be more like the professionals do, where they high five at the beginning of the game, that kind of a thing. Good luck. And then after the game, it's just like more chill.
Yeah, yeah. No,
Definitely.
agreed.
Okay. Do you have anything else that you want to share? Why don't you tell people where they can find the podcast? We've touched on it a little bit. I'm going to be linking the podcast in the show for those of you that want to listen to their podcast and see what it's all about. You also have season 2. You don't have season 2 out yet, right? Or is
It's
that?
not out yet. No. So Abby and I just wrapped up season 1 of Megged. We are starting season 2 relatively soon. We're still deciding what date we're going to start because obviously it's hard with the holidays. But you can find Megged on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. It's just under Megged Podcast. We also have an Instagram, which is at Megged Podcast, and we have a link tree available in the bio just for easy access to either Spotify or Apple Podcasts. So we would love some more followers where we can interact with you guys. Any questions that you might have, any topics you want us to cover, anything that you're interested in learning. Obviously, Abby and I both of us played at the youth level, college level, and now we're both playing at the professional level. Abby actually just told me the other day, between the two of us, we've covered 7 professional leagues, which was not expecting that when she
Wow.
told me that. So we definitely have a little bit of knowledge between the two of us. So definitely check us out, Megged Podcast, either on Spotify or Apple Podcasts.
Yeah, and I've definitely enjoyed listening to your episodes, and listening to the different topics that you guys cover. They specifically cover the women's professional game. So if you're into listening to the women's professional side of things, it's really interesting to get a new perspective on that. I watch more of the men's side. Occasionally we'll dip into women's games now that they're becoming more available. So it's always great to be able to hear the different perspectives and the takes on like the women's game. They just covered the Women's World Cup. So if you want to hear more about the World Cup and the teams and things like that, they had somebody who was a part of the Australian camp on as an administrator type person. So they were
She's
kind
an
of
analyst.
in
Yeah.
the know on that, and so that was awesome to hear, since Australia was one of the co-host countries of the World Cup this past time. So but they are a wealth of knowledge. So reach out to them if you have any questions. Listen to their podcast. It's great. I've definitely enjoyed it, hearing other soccer perspectives as well, especially from females. So it's always great to hear other perspectives on the game.
Yeah, thank you so much, Katie. And thanks for having me. Obviously, the way that this kind of worked out, technically, you'll have me, you'll have Abby separately. So I appreciate you taking the time with both of us because this was loads of fun. I had a great time.
Yeah, it was awesome. And I'm sure we'll have you guys on again. And thank you for coming on. And we'll have Abby on sometime in the near future as well. So thank you very much, and hope to hear from you guys soon. Again, links will be in the show notes if you want to catch more of the Meg podcast. Thanks for kicking it with me, and have a great day. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at kickitwithkatie_podcast _ between all the words. You can reach out to me with questions at kickitwithkatiepod@gmail.com. I also have a feature with SpeakPipe where you can leave me your own voicemail message if you want to be featured on the podcast. Rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.